All right, so we're back for another deep dive. And today we're looking at something pretty unique, I'd say.
Yeah,
A
definitely.
review, actually, not the book itself, but a review of George Dawson's Life is So Good. And, at first glance, maybe you're thinking, okay, another memoir, right?
Right.
But what's really fascinating here is that Dawson learned to read at, get this, 98 years old.
Yeah, that's incredible, to think about a whole lifetime of experiences and then finally getting access to that world of written language.
Exactly, like a whole new dimension opens up, right?
Right.
And that's kind of what makes this review so interesting.
Yeah.
It's not just about Dawson's life, but also how his late-in life literacy shapes the way his story is told.
Absolutely. It's a whole different perspective on the 20th century, really. I mean, the guy lived through it all.
He did, he did. So our mission today is to really dig into this review, figure out what the reviewer found so captivating about Dawson's story, and also, where they saw some weaknesses maybe.
I'm interested in that, yeah.
Yeah, me too. So one of the things that really jumped out at me, and the reviewer mentions this right away, is the way Dawson opens his book. It's pretty intense.
Yeah, talk about starting with a bang.
Right. He starts by recounting witnessing a lynching as a young boy.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a powerful way to grab the reader's attention.
It definitely sets the tone, doesn't it? I mean, it's this visceral, immediate experience of the kind of racial injustice that unfortunately defined that era for so many people.
Absolutely. And I think the reviewer makes a good point about how that choice really sets the stage for the central themes of Dawson's life.
Yeah.
We're talking about not just racism, but also illiteracy and the barriers they create.
And, it's interesting because even with that heavy start, the title of the book is Life is So Good. It's like he's acknowledging the hardships, but still finding a way to celebrate life.
Exactly. And the reviewer really picks up on that perseverance, this idea that Dawson kept going despite facing all these challenges,
Hmm.
but then they go on to say something that I thought was kind of intriguing.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, they talk about a sense of restlessness and aloofness in Dawson's character. And it got me thinking, like, is it fair to expect every memoir to be this deeply personal, introspective journey?
That's a great question. I mean, I guess it depends on what you're looking for as a reader, right?
Yeah.
Some memoirs are all about digging into the emotional landscape, while others are more focused on recounting events and experiences.
True, true. And so what does the reviewer actually say about this restlessness and aloofness? Do they give any specific examples?
Yeah, actually, they do. They point out that Dawson's life, I mean, the guy had some incredible experiences,
Oh,
right?
like what?
Well, he traveled, he worked tons of different jobs, even had, a little bit of
Sounds
romance.
pretty well-rounded.
Right. But the reviewer's point is that the memoir doesn't really dig deep into Dawson's inner world, his feelings about these events. Like, there's this one example they give where he mentions his wife passing away in just a single sentence and then just moves on to the next chapter of his life.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty brief.
Exactly. And the reviewer felt like that kind of emotional detachment, happening over and over throughout the book, it left them feeling a little bit disconnected from Dawson on a personal level.
So it's like we have this incredible story of resilience, of overcoming adversity, but maybe we're missing that emotional core that some readers might crave in a memoir.
Yeah, I think that's the tension the reviewer is highlighting, and this is where the role of the co-author, Glaubman, really comes into play.
Ah, yes, Glaubman. Because the reviewer definitely has some thoughts about him.
Oh, yeah, they do. They think Glaubman's presence is way too intrusive, like he's constantly interrupting the flow of the narrative with his own commentary and questions.
Oh, interesting. And how does that actually play out in the book?
Well, for example, the reviewer mentions how Glaubman keeps bringing up historical events that Dawson either doesn't remember or wasn't personally involved in.
So it's almost like Glaubman's trying to insert himself into the narrative, maybe even trying to fill in the emotional gaps where Dawson himself doesn't provide that level of introspection.
Yeah, I think that's one way to interpret it. And it definitely raises questions about the dynamics between a memoirist and their co-author.
Right. Like, is Glaubman trying to shape the story in a particular direction? Maybe pushing it towards a more conventional memoir format, even if that wasn't Dawson's original intention?
Possibly, and it makes you wonder, would the book have felt more authentic if it had just been Dawson's voice, raw and unfiltered? Or is there something valuable in having Glaubman's perspective alongside Dawson's? It's a tough call.
It is, it is. And, all of this kind of leads us to the reviewer's main critique, which is that while Dawson's story is undoubtedly inspiring, the way it's told, maybe because of Glaubman's influence, reduces it to a kind of feel-good cliche.
Yeah, I see that. It's like they're saying the focus on this positive outlook on Dawson's resilience might overshadow the more nuanced, complex reality of his experiences.
Exactly. And the reviewer even goes on to talk about this broader trend in the inspirational genre
Hmm.
where, there's this tendency to prioritize a happy ending or a triumphant overcoming of obstacles, but maybe at the expense of a more realistic, messy portrayal of a person's life.
Because, like, sometimes we want our inspirational stories to be a little too neat and tidy, right?
Yeah.
But real life is rarely like that.
Right, right. So here's the million-dollar question. Knowing all of this, the reviewer's criticisms, the co-author's role, does it make you more or less interested in reading Dawson's story?
Hmm. That's a tough one. I think for me, it actually makes me more intrigued. It makes me want to explore those gaps that the reviewer identified. Like, what was Dawson's actual perspective on those historical events? What was he feeling during those moments that the memoir kind of glosses over?
Yeah, it's like we're left with this puzzle, and I'm definitely curious to try and piece it together. I'd love to hear Dawson's own voice, even if it's through the lens of Glaubman's contributions. So I've got to ask you, if you could sit down with George Dawson, this man who lived through a century of such incredible change, what would you ask him? What knowledge would you want to gain from his unique perspective?
After everything we've talked about, I think I'd be most curious to hear about his experience learning to read at 98. I mean, can you imagine what that must have been like to unlock that whole world of literacy after a lifetime without it? How did it change the way he saw his own experiences, the world around him?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. It really gets to the heart of what makes Dawson's story so compelling. And honestly, this whole deep dive has just sparked so many questions for me. I'm definitely going to be seeking out Dawson's book, and I encourage our listeners to do the same. Who knows? Maybe we'll do a follow-up deep dive once we've all had a chance to read it. But until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.